Hi everyone, I'm Colombe and this is Andrea, and we are the co-founders of Atlas. Today we'll talk about how to build a country. But first, let me introduce ourselves. As you can probably hear from my accent, I'm French. You haven't yet heard Andrea, but it will become pretty apparent that he's Italian. Perhaps. And a few years ago, we started mobilizing people across borders with the idea of uniting, of coming together in order to be able to overcome global challenges. Lots of words. Let me recap. There are a lot of global issues like climate, like the fact that Amazon doesn't pay its taxes all across the world, and so on, that are global. This means that no country alone can solve them and that they're not being tackled today. We'll explain how we plan to actually solve them. But basically, we started coming together across borders saying, look, the elite, governments, companies are not solving these issues. Us, the people, can actually unite, can share best practices, can work together in order to be able to solve them. So at Atlas, for the last couple of years, we've been mobilizing people in over 130 countries, and we've done a lot of different campaigns on climate, on women's rights, on access to COVID vaccines, and so on, until today. Today, and by today I mean the last couple of weeks, with our members, and we started working on the idea of creating a country. And that's why it's called How to Create a Country. By a country, I mean a system of governance that is global and democratic. Yeah, we are democratic. We're on the democratic spectrum. And so what we want to do is build basically a global system of governance democratic. So a global federation, it could be a global country, anything that people can imagine. We'll get into it later on. And as a result, what we're doing here today is we're coming together to speak about why do we need a country? What is a country? What are some of the services you need to provide? Can crypto and other tech actually help us in doing it, or is it going to be harmful? And we'll also look at cool experiments happening, philosophical questions coming from it, and so on. But this is season 0 of the show. We're testing out, so we want to first kind of explore the idea, explain why we're doing it, and talk further about why we need a global country. So Andrea, the mic is yours.
So I'm Andrea, I'm the guy with the Italian accent. So thank you, Colombe, for this intro. It was very clear. And now I want to jump straight into why we might need a global country or a global institution. And I think Colombe hinted to that. But let's really make the case for it. Because if we want to pull up this massive project and we want to do it for the next many years, we're going to need very convincing arguments, and hopefully people that are following this show will then be able to spread the idea and involve more people in what we are doing. So why do we need something global, where democracy can be applied across borders, where people can elect representatives or in similar ways get legitimacy to this body to act? Because in today's world, we are facing several crises, and many of them are global in nature. And even worse than that, people are not finding solutions. The current system, the current countries, the current powers in this planet are struggling to find a way forward. Let me take the most obvious one to start, climate change. I mean, we all know how important it is to find a solution to climate, how incredibly relevant it would be to find a way to coordinate answers and policies to tackle climate change, curb emissions, find new technology to curb climate change.
Because just to input here, if one country actually behaves well and takes drastic climate action, which is needed, let's say your country, Italy, tomorrow wakes up and decides to do the right thing, unless all major polluters do the same, it won't work, right? It's better to do it than not to do it because we'll stand more of a chance, but it won't work. We need all major polluters to come together and work on a comprehensive and radical climate plan.
So while all initiatives like Just Stop Oil, targeting the UK government, or COP27, COP26 that try to advance global policies in the framework we have today are needed and welcome, they don't seem to be enough. And I mean, there are many reports showing how our climate policies are not ambitious enough, how countries are failing. So this is the perfect example why we need a global system to come together and actually give legitimacy to strong and very swift climate action to basically save the day for us and for our grandchildren and so on and so forth. So climate is the perfect example where a global system would enable this kind of activities and honestly life-saving policies.
A global democratic system, because we have the United Nations today that are trying to change it, and we'll talk about the UN and other intergovernmental organizations later. but it's not working because the mechanisms are not binding and
Absolutely.
so on and so forth.
So this was just an example. Let's pick another one. Nuclear wars. So we all know what's going on, for example, in Russia and Ukraine. We all know that the tensions are rising. We all know that if a crazy dictator acts, we might well see the end of humankind or a very, very bleak future. And right now, we don't have a global system to prevent dictators to launch a global nuclear war, but also simply to aggress other countries. Why? Because the United Nations was built for this purpose, but is sadly completely inadequate and not fit to purpose in today's world. So we need a global government, a global democratic system that actually can basically guarantee peace across the planet, and is exactly like a federal system in the United States, guarantee the states do not go to war to each other, and actually the armies do not exist within a country. And this is exactly what we have to aim for. We need to aim for the complete removal of armies and weaponry from the planet, because we don't need it if we actually come together. So nuclear wars and wars in general can be prevented if there is a global system where everyone subscribes into, obviously democratic, so the policies are shared and not imposed.
And those are just some of the issues. I'll mention two others. The next one I want to mention is global inequalities. So inequalities across the world are rising. And this is despite the fact that, for example, absolute poverty has been going down in recent years and so on. But the level of inequalities between continents, between rich and poor, within countries and so on, is rising. A few individuals, a few companies are hoarding a lot of resources, are accumulating wealth, while the rest of the world doesn't have access to it. And if you look at hunger, it's very clear we have enough food across the world in order to be able to avoid any hunger, any famine, right? However, over and over again, we have famines, and it's something that is accepted. We have people dying of hunger, and we have the tools to solve it. I remember seeing actually a Twitter video that was, one, hilarious, second, made you realize how much the world is malfunctioning, and made the case for it. It was basically a funny video about Earth officially interviewing to join the Global Federation of Planets, a hypothetical body. And in this interview, the interviewer was going like, so, are you guys in space yet? Nope. Okay. So, have you guys eliminated diseases? Nope. Okay. So, you obviously don't have wars or hunger, right? And Earth was like, well, yeah, we do. We have wars and hungers. And then the interviewer went, well, how come? And Earth went like, well, because of administrative divisions. And the interviewer went like, you have hunger because of admin. Like,
crazy stuff.
How? And it's actually true if you think about it. We have enough food, we have enough resources in order to be able to feed the world, in order to be able to live well together, but we don't. So countries try to tackle this a bit through progressive taxation and other measures, even though,
but it's not enough. Clearly.
Exactly, social nets and so on, even though within countries you still have poverty. But at the global level, there's no such effort, and there's no reason for which a country can have too much food and another not enough, right? Like, we are all part of the same human race. We should be able to live together, to support one another, to have basic principles of humanity. Absolutely. You don't let someone starve. That's all. We have enough resources to all live well if we do it together. We need a system where we have a global taxation system so we can redistribute resources, where borders are not an impediment to actually being able to receive aid and food, where we feel and live as one, so that it's unacceptable for a migrant to die in the Mediterranean while people live safely in Europe, right?
Absolutely. And that's not only, these are all issues that we can tackle better together, but they're also wonderful opportunities we could nurture. Let's take a few examples. Space exploration.
After
very easy, exactly.
My Global Federation of Planets, it's perfect.
It's a perfect transition. But if you think about it, we are doing pretty cool things in space, and this mostly come from the budget of one country, mostly NASA, but also a few other, like the European Space Agency, Japan, China. But actually, if you could combine these resources and have a global program for space, can you imagine how faster and farther we could go? And again, this could be a game changer in many ways, also technologies development, both through space, but technology in general, research. If we could actually research together solutions as one humanity from a public point of view, it would be so much more effective than having a lot of little centers working in isolation.
If you look at space in itself is a huge opportunity indeed. And we tend to sideline it when we look at it like, but we have so many problems on Earth, why look at space? It's not the solution. I'm not advocating for recreating a new human civilization on another planet and abandoning this one. That's not what I'm saying. And I think that space enthusiasts that say that are really misguided. We should solve Earth's issues.
Yeah.
However, we should also look at space exploration because it's really cool to find that maybe we're not alone. Or a lot of new techs have been developed through space exploration, have been tested in space, were developed for the purpose of space exploration, but then brought to the public, right? And there's the downside that if we don't do it, then the issues that exist on Earth, the inequalities, the tech monopolies and so on, will be replicated in space and we'll have even less control on it because we'll have even less access. So if you look at it, we don't have enough, I don't remember if it's inner space or outer space treaties, we don't have one to regulate the use of, I think it's outer space.
Yeah, the last one is like from the 70s.
Yeah, to regulate the use of space. So right now, it's kind of the Wild West. It's whoever goes first kind of takes it.
Yeah.
But that's insane. Literally what lies above our heads across the world should be a common good for humanity.
Exactly.
We should be able to come together and decide how we want to explore it. What are the rules of the game? Right now, we're polluting space a lot with
satellites, junk.
And junk coming from space missions and so on. We're replicating some of the issues. How are we going to deal with it? Are we just leaving stuff in space? For me, one of the best case examples of coming together was the International Space Stations, where you saw so many countries working together, sharing the command and so on. We should, as people of the world, be consulted and be told, okay, what do you want to do with space? Is it a priority we want to explore? It's a big budget. And if so, how do we approach this? Are we doing it from a sustainable perspective or are we actually polluting as hell?
And if you have a democratic system, obviously this would be the subject of a political program of, for example, a global party or another one or a global representatives. Like, I want to do this with space, I want to do this with, these are their policy, and people would vote for it and express their preferences, and this would happen. Right now is in the hand of a few superpowers, which obviously take their own selfish decision, probably not even listen to the citizens. It's more like political decision for the United States or for the Europe, or super big tech entrepreneurs that are the first to get there, so they make their own rules. And it's not the right approach. Like, you would never design a system this way.
And it's just to conclude on this topic, I was having this week discussions again about the metaverse and new technologies. I see any new tech, like in the time social media back in the days, or now the metaverse or space exploration technologies and so on, not as end goals but as tools.
Yeah.
They are tools that human can use for good or for evil or in a neutral manner. But also those tools kind of, for me, represent who we are and our own biases and our own mistakes, right? And right now, an existing issue we see across the world is nationalism, nation states first type of approach instead of thinking of the common good. And unless we come together for new opportunities such as tech, research, or space, those are just some elements, then we will replicate the exact same mistakes we are fighting on today.
So, I mean, you see why what we're doing makes sense. And obviously it's a long-term solution and not an easy project, but there is a reason why we decided to invest our time in this. And if you follow our work before, if you just get to know us, you can Google us. We're not crazy people. We try to do our best to actually improve stuff, and we succeeded in the past. We also failed sometimes. And that's why we decided this is our next big thing, and we hope it can be yours as well. So now that we identify the issue, let's invest a few minutes to discuss about why the current system is not working, because you must know your enemy, right? Or your competitor. So today we have some global bodies. We have the United Nations, we have agency of the United Nations that are global, we have multilateral pacts, forums, and obviously many of these different constructs have some benefits. They help a bit the cause, but they are...
And they've done a lot of good.
And they've done a lot of good in the last 70 years and even earlier, some of them. But all of them are kind of dodged by the same issues. First of all, in all these forums, national interests come first.
And that's because of the very makeup or the very structure of the bodies, right? If you look at the United Nations, it's made of member states. So it's literally governments coming to represent national interests first.
Yeah, which obviously on certain issues, it matters less. But for example, we've seen it in COVID, vaccine distribution, climate, cutting emissions.
Or the lack of, and the lack of.
The lack of both. Or now the war. National interests actually thwart completely global action. So it's clearly, it's the main problem. Then there are at least other two big problems we identified. One is uncoordinated electoral timetable. So being all these bodies and forums made by nations, nations have different cycles within themselves. So maybe there is one year where the United States is changing their president, and this means that for 6 months the US is completely off chart for anything that is global, or is actually only thinking about their own interests, for completely focused on their own borders. And then this might happen in India, this might happen in Europe, this might happen in South Africa. So basically each nation is really focused on themselves. So some governments are completely shifting their policies, so it's very, very messy.
It just means that creating global action is very difficult because you have different electoral timetables in democracies. Let's not even talk about authoritarian countries yet. And then have different priorities being raised at different times.
Absolutely. And the last one, and I think we think this is very important as well, is the lack of democratic legitimacy in what global institutions can do. So even when countries might align, even when the timeline works, there is a big problem that the UN cannot easily tell a nation or someone else what to do. Why? Because no one voted for those people to sit there in New York and take decision. Obviously, it's a kind of very indirect democracy, so heads of states kind of broker deals at the United Nations, but the lay person like me did not vote for these people to be there. And that means that they feel very distant. That means that whatever I hear about the United Nations is always filtered through national news and national politicians, and that weaken tremendously the impact that they can have. So democratic legitimacy, direct vote or similar system is very important for a governance to be effective.
Especially when you consider that a lot of those organizations like the United Nations have a big part of their member states that are authoritarian.
Absolutely.
So, in the United Nations, you have this thing called the Security Council, which decides on a lot of topics and is made up of 15 member states, I think, at all times, including 5 permanent ones. So they're always there and they have a right of veto. And those are China, Russia, the US, France, and the UK. And just in this, you have China and Russia that are extremely authoritarian, right? And so you have no democratic legitimacy. They will be able to veto anything that is democratic. And you also have bodies that are completely paralyzed by authoritarian countries. And themselves, those bodies, last point, are also non-democratic, because when you have 5 countries that can hold hostage most decisions, it's non-democratic.
So you see many issues, and that's why we need a new solution. And we think we got one. And it might be not perfect, and we must develop it with all of you in the coming years, but I think we got something here. Colombe, do you want to present it?
Yes, I think I kind of spoiled it at the beginning of
many times,
but I think it's useful to kind of understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So as you've seen, we've made the case first on why there are some issues that are global. We actually talked about climate, nuclear wars, global inequalities, space, research, and tech. So some issues that are global that we need to deal with together, because otherwise they are not getting solved and we are not actually finding new opportunities. We explained that it's not being done by existing intergovernmental organizations or multilateral pacts and so on, because of the way those are structured, because of the current world order, and that countries are not capable of dealing with them, right? This is what we've been speaking about. As a result, what we've done for the last few years is we've run campaigns on those global issues to try to raise awareness and change a few things. Most have been unsuccessful, obviously. Some of them have been more or less successful. Yeah. But we realized that it was a bit of an impossible way forward. So we definitely need to solve global issues in the meantime until we find a long-term solutions. But we can't just climb a mountain, then hope that countries will do what's right, and then another one on another topic while new issues arise. What we need is a system change. We actually need an urgent, real system change.
Yeah.
And based on what we've been discussing, and based on all of the conversations with our members and volunteers and so on, we realize that what we need is a democratic global governance. I know it's a mouthful. It sounds boring as hell. People fall asleep whenever I say it. But one, it's actually super exciting and you'll see it soon. And that's why we brand it a global country or a global federation, because it sounds cooler and more sexy.
And also more understandable.
More understandable. But basically we need a global governance system that is democratic, where us, the people, decide, number one, how we are governed, right? Because the very principle of being governed is you give, you will, you vote, and legitimacy to an institution. So we need to decide. It shouldn't just be a few elites, a few men in a room, like in the past, saying, oh, we're going to build this global organization. No. Us, the people, need to decide how we want to be governed. Need to decide what democracy means in today's ages, right? Like, I love parliaments. It doesn't mean it's the only way forward. You could have direct democracy. I like it less, but, it's for the people of the world to decide. How should the executive behave? What is power? How often do you have elections? Do you have elections? So The people of the world should decide what type of governance system they want, what competencies should be held at which level of government. That's something they should decide, and in order to be able to systematically solve those issues. We mentioned climate and so on. There are a lot of new issues that will arise, and we need to systematically be able to coordinate, deal together, actually put forward binding actions so that we can move forward as one. It's to avoid doomsday, but for me, it's also the only way for humanity to prosper on the long term.
And why now? Why now? Because obviously there are many issues that we described before, but we're also lucky enough to have finally developed the technological capabilities to make this easy, smooth, and possible without incredible coordination across the planet. Because we have now, for example, technology, obviously the web, that helps a lot in doing anything.
The web.
When
were you born? The web
is like
platform.
From the 80s. But we also have the metaverse up and coming, which means that in the future we'll be able to sit all in the same room, discuss topics, vote on legislation, so having actually a virtual chamber, for example, or blockchain, secure online voting across the planet. So we finally have the enablers to allow for this solution to become reality, to be experimented, to be trialed, and then to be kind of like released to everyone. So we have the issues, we have the enablers. What we miss now is the political will. So we're actually going to make sure that the political will comes very clearly and very soon. And for that, we have a plan. Colombe, do you want to tell us about the plan?
But it's not just the two of us having a plan. I mean, it would be
Hopefully
weird.
a bit more.
And Atlas, the movement that we built, has thousands of people involved that have been discussing this over the last few years. And we came up at a General Assembly with this plan that we're going to be implementing in the next couple of years. And there's three main parts to this plan on how to create a global country. Because it's really weird. It hasn't really been done before, although there are really cool experiments that we'll be discussing in those episodes. It's consultation, global campaign, and institution building. We start with consultations. As mentioned, it's not for me or for anyone else to say, this is what the global governance system will look like. This is what democracy is. That is very undemocratic. So we will run a 1-year-long consultation starting in January 2023, where the people of the will be able to participate in the consultations to discuss this, prioritize issues, propose solutions, vote on them regularly, and move forward. We'll do this both online and also organize meetings offline to try to provide real forum for discussions in person that are also needed and so on. So that's the first thing, consultations.
Then we're going to do a massive campaign. So let me give you the context. Every 5 years, the United Nations, so the current global institution, it selects its own boss, called the Secretary General. Is a selection, not an election, because basically the P5, so the big powerful countries that Colombe mentioned before, can veto any candidate. So the minimum common denominator is normally chosen. It's someone very like watery that everyone can like. And
it's always a dude. It's
always been a dude for the last 80 years. 86, incredible. And none of us has any say on this. So 2 years ago, so at the last round, we actually participated in this process. We said, okay, why the people cannot propose a candidate, a female candidate in our case? Why is only nations that can do that? So we actually proposed a very cool candidate. We launched global primaries. She was selected. She was the former president of Ecuador, vice president and president of Ecuador. And actually, incredibly enough, in just a couple of weeks, she was discussed at the General Assembly and her nomination was sent to the Security Council, so the higher body of the United Nations, that obviously either vetoed or did not discuss it.
Yeah, the emails address don't actually work on the website, so we can't get in touch.
So just to tell you about the transparency of the whole process. So we never heard anything out of it, but we understood the potential of it. Thousands of people helped us in this achievement. So we said, okay, we're going to do the same for 2025 and 2026 as the next round. And our candidate will actually run on this platform. The idea of democratizing global governance, making sure that people all over the planet can participate, can vote, and finally change the rules of the game. So these are the massive campaign we have ahead of us.
So consultations in 2023. Then once we have a joint vision of the world that we have adopted and voted upon, we run a UN campaign. So we try to mess with the system, basically. We try to get existing candidates to adopt this vision of a global democratic world. We'll run primaries to have a candidate that pushes it forward. We highly expect, to be honest, that this candidate will be vetoed by the United Nations Security Council because it's about democracy. And, not all countries are very happy with this. And if and so they are vetoed, we can go and be like, look, we tried, we played nice. Like, we actually tried to engage. but you refuse to let the people be heard. And so this is when the third part comes in, institution building. Who said that a global federation, a global country, a global democratic governance cannot be created by the people? No one. There's no reason for which we can't do it. As Andrea mentioned, we have the tech, right? We have access to resources. We have people uniting and wanting to do it.
And actually in history, countries have always been created by the people. It's just now that we are a bit more shy about it. But this is how it always went.
Exactly. And so we will actually create those organizations. So again, we are going to build a global democratic federation, a global democratic governance through consultations, a UN campaign, and institution building from the ground up.
And so this is the plan. It is very exciting, very ambitious, as you know. But why are we talking to you right now on this TV show? Because we decided that the best way to communicate all of this, to involve people from the start and to actually build a community around this idea, is to broadcast regularly about it. We really need to create a new consciousness, a movement around this. So this is the effort that we're doing to speaking to you almost every day, right, Colombe? So what's the plan for the coming weeks?
So what we're doing is a few things. On Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays, Andrea and I go live on Twitch and YouTube in order to be able to talk about a specific topic. Right now, we're talking about why we need a global country overall, but then we'll actually look at what is a country? Why do you need a country? Will you look at the economic side of it? We'll look at experiments that have been done. And we'll look at the theoretical and philosophical questions. And then we'll take you along on our journey to build this country with you in order to show how we're doing it, the mistakes we make, the many mistakes we will make, and so on. And then on Thursdays, we're doing a longer episode like this one that is actually pre-recorded in order to kind of summarize the thinking of the week.
Exactly.
That's one of the things. And you can help us and support us by liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, giving a lot of love, basically feedback, comments, ideas. But we're not only doing this. At Atlas, the movement, we are actually preparing the consultations. For this, we have teams of campaign, policy, tech, communication, community, and so on, that are working heavily on putting those consultations together, preparing the campaigns, preparing the institution building. So you can join us, and the links are always in the caption, and volunteer with us in order to be able to build it. And or, because you can always do all of it, if you don't have time but have a few dollars, euros, whatever currency you use to spare, you can donate on our website as well in order to be able to support the show and the work and democracy as a whole.
So this is the first episode of season 0 of this TV show. We're gonna run it for the next few weeks alongside our preparation for the campaign. And then in 2023, we're gonna start with season 1, focus on the consultation and all the very interesting, brainy topics about how you actually build a country from scratch. So I hope to see you in all our next episode. Please, as Colombe mentioned, follow us, support our channels, volunteer if you want, and if you can, donate a few dollars.
Bye everyone, have a good weekend.
Bye bye.
Or week. It's only Thursday.